Oh, shit. Ready? Yep. Get you in the mood here.
Yeah. Want to get my baseball glove and throw a ball against the wall.
Well, welcome to the Tarter Sauce Show. I'm Steve Tarter. With me today, the executive editor of the Peoria Journal-Star, Dennis Anderson. We're going to talk about war movies.
All right.
That's why we're playing what you're hearing on this very fancy equipment that we have here. And this is, of course, the theme is The Great Escape, if you remember that one. So we'll just turn it down a little bit here and hold it for later. There we go. We got the idea. Dennis, you had this idea, and you gave me this great list of movies. And we should probably preface this by saying war movies. Why are you talking about war movies? Well, you know, you can talk about movies incessantly, I suppose. But war movies fill that sort of category it's kind of hard to define. How would you define a war movie?
Well, I think it's a lot like a Western.
Oh, okay.
You know, where there's the better ones tell a good story. It's more than just about blowing things up,
right?
And going to get the enemy,
right?
But I think the ones that tell a good story are they're good. Just
yeah, and you've gave me a list of some of the ones you've seen, which is really you realize when you see a list like this how many war movies there are. I mean, it's a genre, as you mentioned, Westerns. It's a genre of its own, and I think. One of the thoughts I have is, at one time, I think war movies, and of course it depends if they were made during the war. We talk about World War II, where it was propaganda. Mm-hmm. And, hey, let's everyone get behind the war effort, and whoever side you were on, that was probably what the message was. But this era now we're in, where we have small wars, if that can be a phrase, because most people aren't involved with them. Yeah. I mean, you might know somebody who is, family or friends, but it's not like the whole nation's going to war.
Yeah, I say you and I grew up with a lot of people, family, friends, neighbors who all fought in World War II mm-hmm. or had something to do with World War II, and
right.
maybe even knew somebody who had a role in World War I, coming up on the 100th anniversary of that. I think it brought us somewhat of a connection with them.
Right.
And I remember the story, or not really stories. I was visiting my grandparents, and they were in Gary, Indiana. My grandfather worked at steel mills and that. And I had the book, The Good War by Studs Terkel. Mm-hmm. As a lot of people telling their stories about during the time, right. Home front and on the front. And I was just sitting around watching TV at the time, and I saw my grandfather picked up the book, and he started thumbing through it. And then I heard him laughing. And he was in the war, mm-hmm. and he was just like he said the stories you remember are not about the battles or that or at least the things that he was going to share, mm-hmm. but it was the times when he and his buddies were just hanging out mm-hmm. and waiting for something to happen, and he just recognized a story that he had read, a little vignette, and he said that's the war. That's a war he remembered, mm-hmm. and that's how he would share it.
It hasn't been. It's been a long time since they made the movie. I'm thinking of Catch-22, mm-hmm. which kind of follows a little bit of what you're saying there, where the movie. I mean, it's made to be funny, and not say this makes light of war.
No,
but the irony and the whole context of war. Obviously, it's got to be material for endless number of books, but the humor that's in there. You can, whether or not you've been in the Army or in the service, you can identify with the people that are rigid, militaristic, as the phrase goes, and somebody who just wants to do their thing. I mean, that collision, mm-hmm. you take somebody's freedom away and say, now you're over here, you're in uniform, you got to do what we want you to do. That's going to set up all kinds of storylines. And many of these movies that you mentioned, we don't want to necessarily review war movies here today because that would take forever and everyone's selective. But when you think about a war movie that tells a good story, what comes to mind?
Well, I take a look at a recent one, like Dunkirk. And I wish I would have seen that on the big screens. And both my sons went, "Oh, Dad, you got to go, you got to go," and I never did. And then it wound up on demand, and I put it on and I watched it, and I just was like, it was 90 minutes or so. But when I was done, I was almost exhausted from it. But I started it right away, and I can't remember how many movies that I've watched immediately turned it back on and started watching.
Well, that's testimony right there. Yeah. I saw Dunkirk at the theater, and in fact, I thought of, and I've told you this story here in our newsroom. My mom, I'm from England. My mom was in the war. She's 90, will be 91 this year, and had told me about Dunkirk as a kid. And when she told me the story of it, and she was a young girl in England at the time, maybe in her early teens, but she started to cry as she told me, and I was probably 10 or 11 at the time, and I couldn't figure out. Oh, well, I think I immediately assumed, okay, well, so this is important, or this is. I don't know. I didn't understand it, but when you see the movie, you understand that emotion.
They're all individuals. All every story was just so compelling, and you just wanted to see how. And the storytelling was going from back to forward, back to forward. It just the storytelling was so good with characters that you quickly became you cared about what was going to happen to them.
Right, and that's of course that's the beauty of the movie medium, I guess you could say. It puts you in that position because I guess I'll say thankfully, most of us don't fight in a war. I mean, we may be without knowing it, I suppose, in the cyber world that we live in now. But, when you're talking about taking the beach or working your way through the desert or whatever these scenarios are, the movie can put you there. The movie can sort of drop you in there. Hey, you're on that Jeep. You're in that plane, whatever it is, and you can kind of live vicariously through somebody else and feel that fear that otherwise you might not take. You might take it for granted.
Yeah.
Because look at the difference between the John Wayne and I don't know if this is the best one to mention, but the Guadalcanal Diary that he did, which was, I think, shortly after the war. I don't think it was made during the war. But anyway, versus Saving Private Ryan. That whole business of hitting the beach is totally different.
I think technology has moved at least the war movie to another level. And sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it's bad. I'll take one that I wouldn't put on my list was what was it, the Ben Affleck movie? I'm sorry, where he played. Geez, why can't I remember?
The pretend movie?
Yeah.
I can't remember the title either, but it's a science fiction thing. They were trying to. It was involving Iran.
No, I haven't seen that one,
okay.
But I bet you that's not good too.
Welcome to. Do you remember that movie? But we don't remember the title.
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
There was, sometimes a love story doesn't help a movie, but wow, the special effects in that, and you talk about being there.
Well, the famous bomb dropping down.
That was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. But again, I think they just went out of their way to try and make that movie for everybody, and what they did is didn't make a good movie, at least in my thought. But
no, it doesn't. Most of your lists, if you look them up online or whatever, aren't going to give Pearl Harbor top 10 status.
Yeah.
No.
But the ones that are, even if you go back, some that were made during the war or even after, like Mrs. Miniver, that was a home front movie, But boy, what a compelling story that was about the Blitz and the bombing that was happening in England, and while they're always also worrying about loved ones who are fighting in the war. Those are the ones that really resonate with you.
Oh yeah, and you had a good one. I mean, you had a movie on here, Best Years of Our Lives.
Oh yeah,
and you put in parentheses, okay, it's after the war, which again, if you're trying to make a list, folks, I mean, there's so many deviations you can follow, but that's the movie. And if people aren't familiar with that, where somebody comes back from the wall and their hands, he's lost the use of his hands. He has, I think, hooks.
Yep.
And this is, of course, in the 40s.
He was a real veteran.
Real veteran, who played the part and I think got an Academy Award.
Yes, he did.
So there's another side of it where, otherwise you didn't always get that story of the folks that came home, with something,
and
they've lost something.
That was a movie I probably saw for the first time in high school, and that's a movie that stayed with me forever. And I don't know if you see on Facebook, somebody tagged me to 10 movies that had an impact on your life, and that's one is going to be number 9 or 10 for me. I'm not all the way done with that yet, but and that is because it's just such unbelievable stories and storytelling. These are real people who are experiencing things that impact their lives, and it's just. And it doesn't have to be you just being part of the war, or being in the war, or know somebody, but it's about living and being and how things outside of your become part of your life. It was a good piece.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing. Well, movies that have changed your life or register with you long after you've left the theater or left the screening. I think I told you I saw over this past weekend Thin Red Line, which came out about 10 years ago. Has a good cast of people, and none of which I can remember right offhand. But you folks can always look things up on Yahoo or Google. But the thing that got me there was as I'm watching it alone in a back room, so you sort of have undivided attention. And I hope I'm not spoiling the movie for somebody who hasn't seen it, but there's a scene where they're rushing through the American brigade is rushing through this area, and I think it's Guadalcanal, and Japanese held island, and it just reminded me. I'll just cut to the chase of a video game because. They're shooting right and left, and they're on the run, and they're shooting.
Things pop up at you.
Yeah, I think guys are coming around a corner, and some guy's dropping.
It's loud.
And I think, and I don't play video games because I'm too old, but at the same time, I see those commercials, and it's always, guys with big guns or rockets and whatever, and I think sometimes that is projecting us towards, hey, that's
also a movie with a lot of quiet moments.
It is,
because they're spending time looking at a praying mantis or some
on the beach.
It's very pretty movie when you see some of that. Yeah, but there's also those times where
it jumps you back and forth, and I guess that's what we're talking about war movies here on our show today, and I think that's. It's important that people, I think, understand that it isn't meant to say, okay, this is a good thing that we're going to war. It could be. I mean, again, we're talking about World War II, which is often recognized as, I guess it depends on that. I want to bring this up too. We look at things from the USA perspective, obviously. This is where we are. If you look at a lot of the movies now that are coming out from Europe on World War II, they were a lot closer to. If you had your country overtaken, completely dominated by another country, that's going to give an impact. So we could talk about France and some of these other countries that got totally, kind of, they lost everything for a while.
Have you seen that movie, The Downfall? About inside, it was a German movie, a subtitle, and it's all about. Hitler in the bunker and the people who came in and out in those last days.
I wonder if I did see that because somebody pretty good played Hitler, I think, in that. And it's what we need probably is a little. A computer here where we can shoot you names and dates and all that, but we'll let you do all that.
But you talk about movies done by other countries. You wonder if that's one that that Germany had to make,
right? That
maybe some others couldn't make that about,
right?
Yeah.
Well, there was one I saw, a French film, and it's not like I see so many. I always hate the expression foreign films because it always makes it look like, oh my goodness, we got this from Mars or something. Yeah, they're just simply international. So this was a French film about young people that were handing out anti-Nazi literature in Paris or France, and they eventually got caught and they got guillotined. And you see this, and it's like, whoa! And I guess that brings it forward as to, sometimes we might think, oh, I'm going to be part of the French Resistance, and then it's a spy movie and James Bond and all that. when you're sitting in a cafe, and again, these are things I've seen in the films, but I'm sure people can speak from reality on. And all of a sudden, soldiers come in and start picking people up, dragging them out on the street. That's a whole different world. That's something we've never experienced here in this country, and other countries have. And I think that's something we need to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
I love the list because I love lists, and anyone would know that. But the one that the Stalag 17 is on here. When did you see that one?
Probably again in high school.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's an oldie.
What I liked about that movie was it was a comedy. And it was a comedy before Hogan's Heroes.
Right.
But I'm sure Hogan's Heroes had a lot. It owes a lot to that movie.
Well, didn't they borrow some of the cast? I think some of them, or at least one of the guys, was in that.
I'm not sure. Yeah. But that was a funny movie. And that's just a bunch of guys being together and hanging out. Hanging out. They had to be there. They're trying to escape, but that was a fun movie. And what I remember about that was I was talking to my grandparents about it, and my grandmother went to see that in on stage in Chicago. Back in the 50s. So
when it first came out.
Yeah. So to hear that, I could definitely see that as being a play.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Hogan's Heroes, and it's hard to imagine that one could make light of a prisoner of war camp during World War II, but that's the way it worked. I mean, I think that show ran 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So it was.
Well, just look at the generation that came after World War II. That was us. Mm-hmm. What was the thing that they gave us? G.I. Joe. And it became part of how we played, and the games we played and the things we did, and we always played soldier in the backyard and
those little soldiers that Toy Story has made.
Why wouldn't it be? You would think that, of course, the natural thing would be the arts and movies that we watched a lot.
I like the comment on The Longest Day. Not a great movie, but all those stars. And that is a good one. Of course, black and white, made in black and white, right in the heart of the color era. Mm-hmm. When that thing comes around, I think on TV or something on cable, it is hard to.
And they made each one of those characters was somebody that you very quickly became you're invested in them. Mm-hmm. Even down to there's so many. John Wayne all the way to the Bobby Darin and people like that. I think in that movie is one. Even when it's on now, I can't stop, but I watch it.
Now you had, I have to. I always go for the ones that are not on the list.
Okay.
And you had Apocalypse Now. Too weird. Your comment was too weird. But yet, and I can understand that, Marlon Brando and all the rest of it. But there's one of the scenes, and I'm thinking of movie scenes where the music is now in your brain forever. And, of course, the best example of that is 2001: Space Odyssey, mm-hmm. where now when you hear the Blue Danube, you don't think of people in a ballroom. You think of rockets and things going around the moon. But the helicopter scene where the flight of the Valkyries, and where they played, and apparently they did when they came over the rice paddies. That's a pretty memorable scene. That gets you rocking on probably the wrong way because they're dropping Agent Orange and everything else. That's probably not a good deal there. Deer Hunter was another one. That really got to me. Deer Hunter.
Yeah, I agree. It was a very good movie. Another one I saw in college, and a great cast. A very compelling story. One you can't take your eyes away from it. But boy, that could have been about a half hour to an hour shorter, and it would have been a much better movie.
Yeah. You could say that about some movies where if you just take a little time out of that thing. Well, I just watching Russian roulette is a tough deal. That's any time.
But if you could tell Dunkirk in 90 minutes, you could probably tell Deer Hunter in 2 hours.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think. I thought the same. Not to quibble here over movie length, but I don't know how long Thin Red Line was, but that could have been a little shorter.
That was longer
because there's sometimes when you're watching a movie, you think, "Oh, that's it. oh no, it's not, and it goes on and on. And maybe the director had something in mind there, but sometimes you need to stop when you can. Have you thought about anything coming up that you want to see? Maybe a movie that has escaped your list to date.
I'm definitely looking forward to the new movie that's coming out called Overlord, and that's going to be a World War II zombie movie. And I'm surprised that they didn't put it out before Halloween, but
really,
that has some interest to me to see what they're going to do with that, and is it going to be over the top or just?
If I'm not mistaken, and boy, I'm bad on. I need a reference material at my side at all times. But when I talked about some of the films from Europe, I think there's a Norwegian film where, and I know maybe you know this, I don't know, but Norway was. They had their own battle with the Nazis.
Yeah, they were one of the first countries that were taking over.
And it had problems.
For a long time, they were taking care of it.
Yeah. They had a movie where some of the German soldiers were coming back as zombies. And
I've seen, yeah.
They're like on the ski slope. They're in the snow, and they're still coming. And so that's a thing. Maybe this Overlord thing will hit that harder.
And there's been a rash of movies that have come out of England related to World War I with the 100th anniversary that I just haven't caught up with. And I have a very keen interest in World War I and what impact that had on us in history.
You'll probably be interested then in I have not seen the excerpt yet. I need to, because I've talked with the producer. But Channel 47, which is public television.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that series.
It's going to have a whole series on World War I where they went back with the grandson of somebody who had served and actually followed where his infantry or his battalion went. Regiment, I guess is the right term, through Europe. And they fought in like the longest battle of World War I, which lasted like a month and a half or something.
Well, no, there were others that were the longest that Americans were involved.
Okay. Well, what are the longest?
Well, the Somme and Verdun were both about a year along.
My God.
Where
they just camped
just
in.
that battle, yeah.
See, and you can't, and that's another thing. You can't make a movie that you probably can, but that's the challenge of how do you show that kind of day-to-day monotony and anguish and stress that would be, just to have that constant be on the edge that long.
Yeah, I guess my grandfather, again, with a friend of his that both their fathers were in World War I, and the stories that they came back about living in the trenches, and it's amazing how anybody survived those times. Yeah,
and the one thing I always hear about World War I, I don't always hear it. I mean, I guess it's been my sort of takeaway from what I have heard is. It's hard to pin down why they even fought. Obviously there's a lot of politics in Europe, and of course sucked in every country. But it's like just things you want to hopefully avoid in the future.
Well, Steve, what are some of your?
I think you got Bridge on the River Kwai here, and I think aside from a theme, which I always seem to go to as we played, love the what's the name of it? The whistling song.
Yeah.
I mean, it was big in the 50s, folks, anyway. But I like that one, and Alec Guinness, when he finally realizes, oh, my goodness, I've been building this bridge but for the wrong side, That's kind of a great moment. I think Catch-22 is I really love the book, but the movie does, and I got the movie back to look at it again, and you'd think it would be great because it had a good cast, and Mike Michael somebody or other directed it, and he had Graduate. The man who did The Graduate did so it should have been good, but it wasn't, and so that's kind of a loss.
It definitely was as good as the book.
No, and sometimes that's unfair because the book can do all kinds of things a movie can't do, but. It's like you said, you have to get the stories, and there's probably no better example than Dunkirk in terms of using storytelling in movies, and that's a pretty sweeping story. Where if you hadn't got those guys off the beach, it's over.
Yeah.
You know, at least Europe is sealed up. So that was a pretty big story. Lawrence of Arabia is interesting. It's on your not on the list, but you know, there we go to the desert, the Mideast. You can, you know, Lawrence. It's hard to say what exactly the role Lawrence played historically, but that's a big sweeping. And boy, you talk about a long movie. That's a long movie.
I know my parents took me to a drive-in theater to see it.
A drive-in
when it first came out, and and boy, that put me to sleep right then. And my son, just about maybe a year or less ago, he said, "Oh, Dad, we got to watch. It's such a great movie." And okay, we put it on, and I fell asleep again around the same part.
Well, it's consistent.
I guess it wasn't engaging for me as a 5-year-old and later on as a 50-plus-year-old.
No, I think it's one of those you have to be in the mood. And my last recollection of Lawrence of Arabia is we played it down at the Apollo Theater in downtown Peoria. And my habit at that time, we'd put on 2 old movies a month or something. This is some years ago. And
Lawrence of Arabia is part of a double feature?
No. That was one of 2 that we played. Yeah, that'd be a long double feature. But my habit at the time was we put the movie on, the audience is watching it, I would retire to the office and usually talk to somebody who was in there, and we'd wait for the movie to end, and then I'd run back out with 5 minutes to go and, you know, be sure that we could put the lights up and all that. Only when Lawrence of Arabia played, it was like, is that thing still on? It's still on, and you know, it just went on forever. But obviously, we may be giving that movie, you know, less than its due.
Sure.
You know, David Lean, I do remember the director of that one. But no, I think the whole category of war movie is fascinating to me because I think we need to keep it in people's minds that you know, once it starts, it takes on a life of its own. I mean, it's sort of, no wars, probably no 2 wars are alike. I mean, we're being overly generalistic or simplistic here, but I think it's important to give those messages to people that be very afraid of if you get into this, because maybe you believe your cause is right, maybe you feel very strongly about something, but when you go into the war thing, that starts a whole different.
And the people who are fighting the war are the average person.
Absolutely,
you know, it's and to see the impact that it has, and just to see the generation we're living with today, our sons and nephews and brothers who are coming back now, and it's hard to see in many instances, and. But thank goodness for them, and thank goodness for the work that they do.
Absolutely, and you know, when we talk about movies, and I think we're being kind of, you know, sweeping here with lots of statements, because somebody can say, "Oh, you never mentioned such and such a movie."
Of course,
There's
but it might be on my list that we haven't talked about.
Well, your list is long. I mean, and you know, some of the ones, you know, you can go at any point in our history. You know, the one thing I noticed, we don't have too many movies about the American Revolution. You know, we kind of, and maybe that will.
Mel Gibson did one, right?
Yeah, Mel Gibson did one, and you know, Mel's good at doing future and past wars, but I'm thinking of the Mad Max stuff he did, but also he did the one in Scotland, the
Braveheart.
Braveheart,
yeah.
Thank you. Another soundtrack movie, by the way, folks. But no, we don't see too much of that. The War of 1812 has been overlooked, I think. You know, waiting for that movie. I don't know. There's probably Civil War though. What's your take on the Civil War?
Glory is one that always stuck with me. That's a great movie. Cold Mountain. How about that one with Jude Law? That was a good one. And but yeah,
it's and you know, considering and I guess because that's been dissected in other ways. I mean, the Roots TV series kind of worked that pretty well. You know, there's been lots of public TV and things of that sort where they put it as a documentary. I think, you know, we were sort of caught up in the Western. You know, as you mentioned, there's a category of film for Westerns. And Civil War isn't quite a Western, no, but it's you know, it's a little before, I think, or during, but it's it just doesn't quite fit. So we'll have to see on that. But World War I and II, and especially World War II, I think we'd have to say the bulk of them right there, because it involved everybody. And
World War II is a war that, at least in Hollywood, they keep coming back to.
Right.
You talk Saving Private Ryan and Sergeant Fury, the tank movie that came out recently, and it seems the one that keeps coming back because, again, they're telling stories about people.
And there's another story to that, and again, I'm not don't have it in front of me. But I think there were a couple of books written, and they were out a year or two ago, about Hollywood's position in the war in terms of when that war was coming out. Because obviously, if we're talking about World War II, Europe is going through all kinds of things in the late 30s. The United States is not involved. In fact, the United States, the movement is pretty much to stay out. Hey, we already sent our boys over there in World War I. We're not going to do that again. That wasn't a good thing. So you have that kind of sentiment, and I think the Germany employed somebody to work in Hollywood to maybe more than one person. That might be a movie itself. It's not. I don't think all the facts are in on how much sway that person or those individuals had, but clearly. That's a sign that it was important to win the minds over of the public. You might want to think about movies, which is what we're doing here today. We're talking about movies, war movies. Well, Dennis, I think you ready for a break on the battle line?
Sure.
I don't know if I want to hit the theme back up here or not. Maybe we'll just go out regularly as we do. We don't overdo the music here. People might start building up anticipation here. But anyway, Dennis Anderson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And hey, we'll see you in the movies, as they say. And thanks to Matt Dayhoff, who gets this out and lets you see it and hear it. And we'll see you next time on Tarter Sauce.